we have three distinct types of environments in which to monetize represented on the panel. We have virtual worlds, we have avatars, and we have games. Daniel, are you suggesting that what hits 50% may be less game and more what we think of virtual world or avatar-driven environments today?
I think I might be suggesting the opposite, which is that the virtual worlds and avatar driven and sort of real-time social interaction is looking right now, and these things are obviously, it's hard to disentangle because there's a fashion that comes through with what gets venture money and what's growing fast and what's not, but it look like right now they might be a niche market in the West, and games, especially extremely simple games where you have to click the button every few hours, may be the mass market phenomena. At least that is the current kind of trajectory.
Well, let me go to Lee over here, because avatars are not $1 billion business; they are a $10 billion business in Asia. There's extraordinary value in simply playing for virtual goods, for special clothes, for special environments. Right. And Daniel's taken a somewhat contrarian view. Lee, you want to speak to this?
Well, I was actually going to say that potentially one of the other obstacles you could look at, in the States at least, for some of these more synchronous, immersive avatar-based experiences is the usability is still not quite there. If you look at some of the really large Asian companies that have succeeded in the space, they were either working with a very limited UI on a mobile phone. So in Japan, a lot of DNA and Mobogi Town and some of the other sites there, they didn't have too much to work with, so they kept things fairly simple. And I think in the same token with some of the others, and QQ is the same way in China, that there was just some need for people to start to customize or make some sort of statement about themselves via the goods that they use to dress up or decorate their presence in these services. And it kept fairly simple. So I think what you're seeing here a lot with some of the social games on Facebook and MySpace is they're stripping down that usability to such a degree that it's so dead simple for people to start to get engaged in them. If you saw the last CrowdStar game, and now it escapes me what the last one is because they're all vills and towns and happy this and whatever. But the last one, it's just moved
Happy
to this,
Townville.
Yeah, it's literally moving to a big arrow that's just saying on hey, this is where you're getting your goods, right? It's just pushing to monetization, saying hey, this is what I need to do, and getting people to do it. So I think that is one area where the U.S. maybe started with a broader palette or a gaming culture that was potentially more complex, and some of the folks yesterday in some panels were talking about that as far as there was this kind of complicated, complex model, and even the early social games on Facebook, Mafia Wars and whatnot, were really much more in the RPG type mold to start with, but that's gone less and less as far as something that's very, very simple to get people engaged. So I could see that as being one other area that expands that overall penetration for people getting engaged.
If there's one takeaway you get from the session, I've been doing GDC sessions now for 22 years, since the very first GDC, and every time we talk about how do we get a larger audience, keep it simple. And the advice that has been given by Lee and his predecessors is always, as simple as you think you're keeping it, you're not keeping it simple enough.
Right.
And it works, and this works for Asian audiences, it also works for US audiences. Google, famously, when they started, would get messages from an anonymous person which would say 57, 43. It was the number of words on their homepage. And when they got down to 25, he stopped sending messages. By the way, Google, for those of you who haven't been paying attention, has had some success in the intervening years since they made their page simple. What other factors? So keeping it simple is an extraordinarily important one.
Keeping it simple, and I think the other big one is allowing for a considerable range of customization with regard to someone's presence in these services. With regard to IMVU, we're very focused on user-generated model, and the main reason that we started to do that is that as the service started to have some success, you couldn't build these goods yourself. People were really getting excited about certain types of things, and an in-house team is not going to be able to keep up with that sort of consumer demand for different types of products and different types of goods that help them fashion the experience the way they like them. So we went to a user-generated model, and now we have over 3 million items in that catalog, and it allows for a huge range of variety. And I think that's another area that helps to engage people. If you have sort of a single set of things that are maybe corporate, like, hey, here's a bunch of goods, that's only going to appeal to a certain amount of people. Whereas if you say, hey, you're a unique individual and you can make yourself in this virtual environment as unique as you think you are, that expands the appeal of that to more folks, and I think also keeps them engaged longer. So I think it's another area to keep in mind.
Okay, you've just covered, Lee, two almost apparently contradictory ends of the spectrum. You've discovered to keep it very simple, and then you describe, by the way, get the people involved to do incredible amounts of work. So how do you reconcile that?
The simplicity from IMVU's perspective was that we didn't have to have tons of people in the company who were building things, whereas we set out to let users do it. We don't want to be the ones who are deciding what are the things that.
But Lee, I understand why that's convenient for IMVU, but we're asking how do you reach a broader audience? And you said at once that you said we need to get it as simple as possible to draw them in, and then you said, and then we're going to make them do a lot of really hard work.
No. So I wasn't saying that the core user needed to do a lot of hard work. It was more that there's, for that user in a simple experience, giving them selection is okay, as long as it's easy for them to find what it is that they think is interesting.
So give us a pyramid. How many total users need to be supported by what percentage of creators? So
right now, we have about 10 or 11 million unique visitors coming to IMVU every month. There's only about 30,000 people who are selling a product in our virtual goods catalog in a given month. So it's in line with typical averages that you see as far as the amount of people who are just kind of passively engaged in a service versus the ones that might be viewing and consuming a lot of that content versus the ones that might be creating and contributing content.
Right. And for those people who do not have 11 million unique visitors a month, what would be the critical mass? Daniel, you have 10.99 million, I'm sure, but
in some cases,
but what
it actually
would be the critical mass in number for the people over here, if they're looking to do this, that they need to see to have enough items being created for the rest of the population?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say at a very low level, but this thing often happens where there's a community that is on a service, and the demand for those goods kind of pops up within that community. And so we see it over and over again where a regular user becomes a creator because they're part of a community that doesn't really have goods that meet their needs. Mm-hmm. So you can look, a perfect example would be when Avatar came out, all of a sudden a bunch of creators said, hey, I'm going to create a whole bunch of blue-skinned avatars with flat noses and Na'vi-related type items, and now there's a whole bunch of that stuff happening on IMVU.
You have cease and desist yet?
No, because it's all it's a blue avatar. It's kind of
fun. Yeah, I want to echo that point. Is that with World we have a very small community. We have a lot less than 10 million. I don't know how many monthly actives, but it's probably less than 100,000. But it's a pretty vibrant, creative community, and a lot of it is of the 10,000 very engaged users we have every day. 1,000 of them are like, sure, I could maybe make something, and then 100 are like, I'm actually made something, and maybe some fraction of those are actually really good, but you don't need that many people who are good, who are churning stuff out, to have a lot more content than we would have. I mean, if there's 10, 20 people who are making good stuff and working hard at it, and there's 10, 20 artists that we don't have working on the project right now, and so there is scale there.
Okay, we have a lot of material to cover, so I just want to do a show of hands to direct the next set of questions. How many of you are in a business that uses virtual goods as a monetization thing? Show of hands, please. Okay, roughly about half. How many of you would say you are primarily in the games business? Raise your hand. And how many in the virtual worlds business? And you can raise your hand again. Okay, thank you for focusing things. Patrick?
I was just going to add, the contrarian point, if you will, to what IMVU is doing is what Cyworld has been doing. And I'm not saying Cyworld is doing it the right way. Actually, we're picking out ideas from the West and bringing them to Korea as well. But traditionally, we have not allowed third parties to make anything. Mm-hmm. And it's all been driven by what our creatives do inside Cyworld. Now, of course, that's very expensive to do. We have to pay them, when they're paying them salaries and good salaries. And it's an approach. But I certainly think that going forward, as we start to, in a way, hit walls, right? Because we can't create everything.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly do think it's a good idea to allow third parties to bring those. It's a question then of, in the Korean context, what does that do? We don't know, and so we've got to try that.
No.